Welcome back to Dragon Ball Dissection. You know, last episode's script flowed from my fingers so easily. I love when that happens. This one, not quite so much. I think I became overwhelmed with anxiety because I hadn't made enough forward progress in the story. But I've come to terms with it. I get the feeling this is going to end up a lot like the Cell arc, where I'm in the beginning of the arc for quite a while. And that's not a bad thing. It just means there's been a big time skip, and lots of new elements are being thrown at the readers really quickly. The story isn't belaboring those points, but weaving them naturally into the story and moving on. That's as it should be. However, my job is to analyze it, so it leaves a lot to talk about. And rather than being cowed by that, I should embrace it. When we last left him, Gohan spent a pretty decent amount of time crafting a superhero persona for himself, only to answer to the name Gohan and immediately blow his own cover. As such, Videl uses the opportunity to blackmail him into entering the upcoming Tenkaichi Budokai, and she does so through world building. See, she did some digging, read stalking, to find that the winner of the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai was Son Goku, and assumes Gohan is his son because they have the same family name. It's a pretty safe bet since most people don't have family names anymore. So after 8.5 years, Toriyama finally addresses that Goku's family are among the only characters who have more than a single name, and that most everyone else, such as Bluma, only has one. Well, you know, the Dr. Slump characters aside. Now we're finally given an in-universe reason as to why that is. Having family names has gone out of style. It's still a bit unclear in a few cases, mostly with names that, like Son Goku, are rooted in Chinese. There are occasions where characters refer to Tao Pai Pai simply as Pai Pai, for instance. Whether that's a nickname or indicative that Tao is the character's family name and Pai Pai his given name is something I've never been able to find a true consensus on. As long as we're in the neighborhood, I'd like to say I'm pretty convinced Ten Shinhan is a single name. No one ever calls him Shinhan or Han. Most times any character mentions him, it's the full Ten Shinhan. It's almost always the character closest to him, Chaozu, who shortens his name to Ten. While that could indicate the Ten part as his family name, you'd think their familiarity would cause Chaozu to use a given name instead. Then again, Bluma pretty much never uses the name Goku to refer to that character, but instead affectionately calls him Son-kun. But since Chaozu uses the Ten part, that leads me to believe it's a nickname. But maybe that wasn't always the case, as the original Shonen Jump publications from early in the character's run show his name split into two parts, Ten and Shinhan, only for those divisions to be removed in later printings. So maybe it was a family name and then Toriyama changed his mind? At any rate, I don't want to get too bogged down in this. I'd recommend Kanzenshu's Family Name Guide for a much more in-depth look at this stuff. The point is, family names in Dragon Ball are rare. The other bit of world building here is that Mr. Satan apparently won the Tenkaichi Budokai that took place in between the 23rd and this one, which Videl mentions because she thinks it would be amusing if the children of the last two champions got to fight each other. Now, what would be the 24th tournament is something of a vague mystery. When Mr. Satan is introduced, he is said to be the Kakuto champion, and he uses the same word during the Cell games to compare himself to the likes of Goku. Kakuto is another word for martial arts or fighting. However, Dragon Ball has traditionally used terms like Budo instead, hence Budokai meaning martial arts tournament. From what I've been able to glean, Kakuto tends to refer to fighting in general and often is associated with competitions, which is why the official subtitles translated it as combat sports, which is what I've used up until now to distinguish it. While the main characters were participating, the series treated the Tenkaichi Budokai as the decider of the strongest martial artist in the world. As such, Mr. Satan's introduction left it vague as to what his status of Kakuto champion meant. The Budokai was never mentioned. Perhaps it could have been a reference to another martial arts tournament, such as the ones Panputo was said to have won. However, in this scene, Videl refers to the Tenkaichi Budokai as the tournament used to determine the Kakuto champion. Does this mean that Mr. Satan's favorite word has found its way into the world of the Tenkaichi Budokai, now that he's everybody's favorite person? Is this foreshadowing that the tournament has become a very different experience from what we're used to? Did Toriyama use the word in the Cell arc without thinking about it, and is now having to more explicitly tie this back to that reference when it was previously unclear? Or is it him attempting to retcon that earlier scene to imply that Mr. Satan had already won the Tenkaichi Budokai when that wasn't his original idea? Hard to say. There is that moment where Cell talks about reviving the Tenkaichi Budokai with his Cell games, as if it hadn't happened in a while, but then again, how would he really know about it? However, the announcer will state that the last tournament was 7 years ago, which is the same amount of time that was said to have passed since the last arc. Since the Budokai always takes place on the 7th of May, all of those pieces of information appear to place it a mere 5 days before the artificial humans first attacked. As such, that certainly fits with Mr. Satan's introduction into the story as Sports Combat Champion a week later from their chronology. Whether or not that was the original intention, who knows, but it is nice how well it fits. See what I mean? I've already wrung over 5 minutes of content out of about a half a page of conversation. After Gohan is publicly ridiculed for taking a stupidly long bathroom break, he returns to Capsule Corporation because he's not going to let this identity go. At Vidal's suggestion, he's going to enter the tournament as Great Saiyaman. However, wearing a helmet is against the rules, so he needs something else to cover his face. Bloom has better things to do, so she waves him off while saying, yeah, who cares, just put a bandage on your head, it worked for Batman. So Gohan swaps out the helmet for a bandana and sunglasses, and the world continues to think he looks stupid. Quite frankly, I don't blame them. I really prefer the helmet. The design might be based on the character of Kaiketsu Harimao from the 1960s, but I don't care. I think it looks stupid. But since stupid is apparently what Toriyama's going for, hey, it works. Vegeta overhears all of this tournament stuff and declares he will enter, as he believes Gohan has gotten soft during these 7 years of peace. See, this is the example I was referring to last time when I said it was possible to have Vegeta mock Gohan's strength in a scene that actually advances the plot. However, that moment is immediately overshadowed. It seems Goku either constantly eavesdrops on his family or simply has his senses attuned to any time someone says tournament or fighting, because he hops into the conversation to say that if Vegeta and Gohan are entering the Budokai, he will too. And oh geez, what is up with Goku's face here? His eyes take up almost his entire head! He'll use his one day on Earth that Uranai Baba can grant, just as she'd given his grandpa all those years ago. And hey, you know what? I think it's pretty clever to revive that minor plot point after so long. Quite frankly, I'm amazed Toriyama even remembered it. But here it is. 2 months. It's been 2 months since the last time Goku appeared in the story. It's been 5 weeks since Kame-Sennin appeared in the title page to tell us that Goku is dead, but Gohan is taking his place. And to be sure, the next few chapters still focus on Gohan as we transition into the tournament. But this is essentially the point where Toriyama has admitted his bold new experiment is over. I intended to put Gohan into the leading role. It didn't work out. I felt that compared to Goku, he was ultimately not suited for the part. So let's be clear. Despite all the rumors people bandy about in regards to fan backlash forcing Toriyama to change his plan, this is what he has said. Granted, in typical polite fashion, it's a fairly evasive answer that doesn't provide a lot of detail. As in regard to whether or not number 19 and number 20 would have been good villains on their own, it's not something I can argue without having really seen where it would have gone. Personally, I enjoy what is here of Gohan in high school. Would I continue to enjoy it if it had lasted months? Or years? I don't know. There's too little to gauge what it would have been like on a week-to-week basis or how it could have evolved from this. Maybe Toriyama was right. Maybe he wasn't. I can't judge that. I can only judge what's here, and what's here is really, really jarring. While the time between Goku leaving the story and returning to it is pretty small in the grand scheme of things, the amount of time spent creating Great Saiyaman compared to actually using him is ridiculously unbalanced. Obviously, Gohan enters the tournament under the guise of Great Saiyaman, so he's still technically in the story, but that doesn't really matter anymore. Getting Gohan into the tournament could have used any disguise. Since he already happened to have this one, this is what he goes with. But the whole point of Great Saiyaman, Gohan being a superhero, is done. The character is done. It's just Gohan wearing sunglasses now. You could remove the disguise entirely and almost nothing would be different. So in essence, after Great Saiyaman is established, he does all of one thing and is then retired. Now, if you want to be generous, you could say that that's the whole point. It's a joke. Gohan goes to all of this trouble, all of this time, and he's immediately recognized, rendering the whole thing moot. That is a fantastic pull the rug out from under you gag. You might even be able to argue that it serves as a deconstruction of the entire superhero genre, wherein characters think they can hide their identities simply by wearing a mask in front of people who know them. As a segue, it works surprisingly well in spite of itself as a means of introducing Videl and forcing her into Gohan's world. Her discovery pushes the plot along to its next point. But while that moment works well enough as a joke, I don't think it works overall because there's too much setup for it. The story inundates us with a new city, a school, classmates, transformation devices, none of which has any relevance beyond this point. We never return to Satan City. We never return to Orange Star High School. Ereza and Shapna make one cameo appearance after this. The watch is never used again. For all the fuss made about Gohan starting school, he attends for 2 days before dropping out. The only thing of any consequence introduced during this section of the story is Videl, and even she's going to be rendered a background player pretty quickly, further proving my point. It's pretty obvious that none of what we see in the first several chapters is being written as setup for this tournament. It's set up for a story that is never actually told. Toriyama hit the panic button and abandoned ship as fast as he possibly could. After all, if all we needed was for Videl to be introduced and to find out that Gohan was super strong in an attempt to get him into this tournament, we really didn't need 2 separate superhero identities. The story doesn't need to spend time with the golden-haired warrior except to set up Gohan building a better identity for himself. Videl could have exposed him as the golden-haired warrior, or we could have started in medias res with Gohan already in high school and already an established superhero if the only point was to use it as setup to get to the tournament. And yes, he still refuses to admit he's the golden-haired warrior, but eventually it comes out and it's not even a big deal. Think about it this way. In modern Dragon Ball, Kuririn becomes a police officer. We don't see him reach the decision to become one. We don't watch him go through his training. We don't meet all of his buddies on the squad. There is nothing wrong with any of those story elements, but given his job's relative lack of focus to the overall narrative, what we get is proportionate to its importance. Likewise, the baseball game, the jock bully, the stalking, the costume design, those are all fantastic scenes in service to a story where Gohan is a superhero, Orange Star High School is the main setting, and Ereza and Shapner fulfill their roles as supporting cast members. But after that's repurposed to serve no function other than getting Gohan and Videl into the tournament, all of those scenes become irrelevant dead weight. Yes, I just made a comparison between Resurrection F and Dragon Ball Super to the original Dragon Ball and original Dragon Ball Lost. This is the point where Toriyama's writing style begins to collapse in on him. In many ways, his spontaneous writing style has served him well. He's great at thinking on his feet. But he's also writing the worst type of story for it if something goes wrong. Allow me to explain. Imagine if Dragon Ball was an episodic show, like Star Trek The Next Generation. In the second season of that show, they tried to introduce a recurring character named Sonia Gomez to help out in engineering. Unless you're a huge fan, you probably don't even know who I'm talking about, even though she premiered in the same episode as the Borg, and the Borg are the most famous villains from that era. She appeared once more before the writers realized the character just wasn't working and she never appeared again. There was no explanation, no reference, just gone. But it wasn't that big of a deal. In a show where everything is episodic, that works. Most narrative threads are self-contained, which both isolates individual episodes from the rest of the show and ensures that the story within has an ending. In a world where Dragon Ball is an episodic series, Toriyama could very easily do an episode where Gohan decides to be a superhero. Maybe he has plans for it to be a really big recurring plotline, and it's only after it premieres that he realizes, he's just not that into it. And so Great Saiyaman is shelved. It probably wouldn't be that noticeable, but in a story as serialized as Dragon Ball, that's harder to play. Either a poor storyline limps along to a weak ending, or it's rushed to conclusion. I don't think it's uncommon for writers to be surprised by the directions their stories take them. I think it's fair to say nobody sits down with a fully completed novel or screenplay in their head that never changes at all. That's why stories go through drafts. The Great Saiyaman is, in essence, one of Toriyama's drafts. The difference is, it didn't end up being crumpled up and forgotten when it didn't work. Because Toriyama doesn't plan ahead and simply draws where his imagination takes him, it was already inextricably linked into the final story, and any new ideas had to come from it. From a writing perspective, I find it fascinating to witness Toriyama attempt to redirect a story in progress. It's a great storytelling exercise, like those camp games where each person builds a sentence to a story, and the next person has to continue on from that premise and hope something recognizable and coherent comes out of it. As far as such a shift goes, it is impressive that Toriyama is able to lead the first story into the second story in a fairly logical way. Gohan goes to school, Gohan becomes a superhero, his superhero persona exposes him to Videl, Videl tricks him into the tournament influences Goku's decision to come back. It all makes sense. Goku doesn't simply show up out of nowhere with a new bad guy, leaving the new elements dropped without serving as any kind of connective tissue. But compared to the sudden shifts in the Cell arc, where time travel can smooth over some of the logical gaps, where the old villains are merged into tools for the new villain, where it's possible to not notice the seams. I think it's a lot less likely for someone to look at this without going, what the heck just happened here? Excited at the prospect of seeing his father again, Gohan shares the news with the other characters. The next several chapters serve as something of a transitionary period. Gohan trains for the tournament and gets to know Videl better. That naturally phases into the next section of the story, which is good. It takes the time to build up anticipation for Goku's inevitable return, which is also good. I might not be a fan of the story bending over backwards to recall him, but since it is, giving the audience time to become excited for it is smart. For these next scenes though, I would cynically say we've abandoned all pretense. It's not just Goku who's coming back, we're bringing them all back! The old gang is here again! Which, would be a bit more effective if we hadn't seen them all 2 months ago. Okay, I'm going to be totally fair. That's the nature of all of Dragon Ball's time skips. It's Toriyama's way of adding the illusion of depth, of expediting progress, by simply fast-forwarding the story and introducing changes that have already taken place. But it is effective. We relate to the characters. There's no actual break between, say, the end of the Piccolo arc and the beginning of the 23rd Budokai. But we know it's been 3 years since some of these characters have seen each other, so it does work. It's exciting for us to see how much they changed. So too does it work here. This is the longest time skip the series has ever used up to this point. The changes are vast. The only thing that diminishes from this is how we, the audience, were led to believe there was going to be a real absence at play, a real shift from all things familiar. As such, it comes across somewhat as a false scarcity in order to increase demand. Kuririn is taken away just so we can miss him, just so we can be excited to see him again. Putting all that aside though, I find this one of the most striking images, a literal example of a picture saying 1,000 words. In a single panel, Kuririn with hair instantly establishes how much has changed and what has changed. Remember, Kuririn's design is patterned on Shaolin monks. Toriyama has admitted he gave him a plain face. He hasn't worn his monk garb since the Red Ribbon Army arc, so his shaved head, his incense burns, those define his appearance. Doing away with both is a pretty risky change. And it's what I love about the original Dragon Ball. Nothing stays the same. Iconography is not sacred. We don't need Gohan to break the fourth wall to explain. Seeing Kuririn in casual attire with a head full of hair obscuring those defining traits, it's obvious that he has settled down, stepped out of the martial artist lifestyle. He visually represents the shift to a more modern, more Western-style Dragon Ball world heralded by people like Mr. Satan. Seeing him alongside number 18 and a blonde, noseless daughter confirms what we already know. Showing number 18 pressure Kuririn to join the tournament with her so they can both have a shot at the prize money cements their unique dynamic. Toriyama is not skilled at depicting character or relationship development head-on, but damn it all if he can convey so much in a simple vignette. As such, following that scene with Gohan telling Piccolo feels like quite a letdown by comparison. Yep, he's still at God's place. Yep, Dende's still God. Looks a little older, but not all that much. Nothing new is established, we don't learn anything. Time is pretty much frozen up here. This scene saps all the novelty the Kame House scene did such a great job at establishing. As Gohan makes his way back home, he wonders to himself about the rest of the characters. Well, the rest of the characters who might be interested in a martial arts tournament, I guess. He figures that Bluma will tell Yamcha and he has no idea where Tenshinhan and Chaozu even are, so I guess that's that. I might feel a bit miffed at such a dismissal, but you'd be surprised to learn that it doesn't bother me all that much. Gohan is still the focal character at this point, and he is not as close to those three as he is to Kuririn and Piccolo. And I know that's because Toriyama was already working to minimize those characters by the time Gohan was introduced. And I know it's only being done here because, lols, who cares about them anymore? But despite that, it feels natural. It's certainly more organic than Ten Shinhan's "I'll never see you again for no reason" speech. This is change. This is the perfect time to trim the fat, to refocus, to leave it to the next generation, to sell the idea that this is a new Dragon Ball with a new lead character who has his own supporting cast. But once again, that all feels hollow because it's obvious even here the series can't commit to it. It's difficult to take any of this seriously when the specter of Goku is hanging over this chapter, reassuring the audience, it's alright, everything's going back to normal real soon. Thanks as always for watching. Please do me a favor and take care of that liking, commenting, and subscribing thing. Help me out on Patreon if you can. Check out my other videos. But most importantly, in this scary world right now, stay safe. If my videos can help make the quarantine pass a little easier, then I'm all too grateful that they can. Take care of yourselves, and I hope we all get through this really soon. See you next time.